Welcome to Cars Retro Reviews. You know, it's actually a little bit moody in here. Ooh, moody. Anyway, I've managed to hurt my arm, and it's... if we say anything, it's not what you think, number one. Number two, I actually hurt it simply by, and this is going to sound retarded, but I just slept on it funny. And I woke up this morning and doing this hurts a lot. So what this now means is that when I go to jerk off, I'm going to have to cry a lot less than I normally do. I don't know. What this review has forced me to do is to go back and have a look at other real retro titles from the 70s and 80s and really see if these kinds of compilations are worth the plastic they're printed on. I did a piss poor review of Space Invaders, and packages such as the Midway Presents series has practically forced my hand to re-evaluate whether my feelings were justified or whether I was simply out of line. The problem I have with all these titles is that I have no real sentimental value for any of these games. I'll be the first person to come forward and admit that even though I started gaming in the late 80s, I never went back further and played any of these games at the time. It was only until much later when I could play all these games through emulation on PC, and even by that stage I was playing games that were so far ahead in everything, I could never really appreciate what these games stood for apart from being the start of what I would love to spend my spare time doing years later. I can say that this particular compilation has ended up on a bunch of consoles: Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, PlayStation, Game Boy Advance for fuck's sake, and the Saturn version, which is the version I'll be reviewing. I'll make special mention that this comes with something special I'm not sure any of the other versions do, and that's a doco where the developers involved in each game go through a Q&A on how games came to be, and all these cool little tidbits you'd only find in very few other places. Just to add value, I've added it here as a separate video and linked it in the description for those who'd like to watch it. It does seem like it was made out of 100 VCDs all put together, so the original video quality is not the best, and there are moments where there's no video or sound. Interestingly though, it does add a special ambience to the video. The games we have are Asteroids, Battlezone, Centipede, Missile Command, Super Breakout, and Tempest, all of which are both 1 and 2 player. After playing these, it was easy to see which games have aged well. Presentation of each game is probably the highlight of the package. We're given 6 games laid out in a really impressive way. We can scroll through each game to select it, and it's clearly marked out on options, play, and even the history of the game. The in-game presentation for each game should be reviewed individually, but the blanket statement that they're suitable, practical, and while minimal, were done really well covers it accurately. Every game is supposedly 100% accurate to the T graphically speaking. The only largely noticeable thing was that the font in Missile Command was cut off, and I'm not sure whether that was either in the original or the fact that I'm playing a US copy on a PAL Saturn. I would imagine that that one bug is meant to be in there. Everything else looks pretty good, but so it damn well should. It was done on the Game Boy Advance. If this can't even handle that, it would be an incredibly poor port. I mean, what we're dealing with here are basic graphics. Not a whole lot more should be done to port something this simple graphically over to any console. I can appreciate that earlier consoles might have had a hard time, but some of these games had been out for 10 to 15 years by the time this compilation reached the Saturn. Sounds pretty good. There's not a whole lot going on, but it's retro, and that's what you get for something this old. What were you expecting? Sound effects are all pew pew and shit. Gameplay needs to be split up. Firstly, Asteroids is perfectly fine, controls well, and difficulty is just about right. I hope by this stage I shouldn't need to explain this game to anyone, but for those that live under a rock, you're a spaceship and you shoot space rocks. Battlezone is pretty good, but the one thing that got to me is where the tanks were situated. They would respawn somewhere where I couldn't possibly see, and then even though I spun my turret around 360 degrees, nothing was there. But then I would get shot out of nowhere, like, what the fuck? That's cheating. Hide behind your square blocks and your triangle whatever the fucks. Minus that, everything else is pretty good. Centipede is another game which is perfectly fine, also controls well, and the difficulty's about right. Missile Command goes from like, hey, level 1 and coming at you nice and slow, to a hard and deep rape the following level. Didn't even give me time to lube up or anything. Once you get past that level, the third level comes at you even harder, bringing on tears in such a way that there aren't even enough deities in this world to pray to that will slow down the difficulty. But having all 3 buttons control the 3 towers at the bottom is a really smart move that I appreciate. I have been spoiled too much to enjoy this version of Super Breakout. I've played many iterations, including the one that was on the BlackBerry. When I started my job 5 years ago out in the projects, we were issued with good smartphones and the Blackberries were the only device supported. And I fucking flogged that game to death. Everything about that version is far superior to this, not to mention that there's a graphical glitch in this game which affects gameplay. Your ball will hit a brick and then if you manage to hit in the same area, it will hit the next row up, which is fine, except when it comes at an angle, it should actually hit the block next to it, and it doesn't. It goes right through it. It's not really a small glitch that you can easily forgive and forget, and your paddle is way too small. I could start to discuss about how modern games are being dumbed down, but here it would honestly benefit the game if you made it slightly easier. I know, challenge, blah 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 blah, and it's looked down upon like a board of gaming snobs, but it would make this game more fun, and look, there's still plenty of challenge. Later iterations of this game had proved upon this, like upgrades to your paddle in such a way that this game really feels very lacking because of it. It still stays true to the arcade original, and in that way, this port succeeds very well. Just know that in this day and age, you could probably find a better version done in Flash on some website from 2009. Tempest is easily my favourite game out of the lot. It looks good, it feels good, and there's a certain something about it that makes me want to continue playing it that the others did not. Obviously, I wasn't the only one who felt this game was pretty amazing as they released Tempest 2000 and even the Saturn got a port of that game, which I've already covered off in a previous review. And this version is really no different. The difficulty is probably the most perfect out of all the ports as well because the difficulty is gradual, but like a frog in a cauldron of hot boiling water, boiling to death, you don't really notice the difficulty until it's too late. Brilliant. Replay value is there if 80s arcade ports are your thing. There is a 2-player component and there's plenty of challenge. I've been told you can knock the whole thing over in about 5 to 6 hours. Would I recommend this game? Yes and no. Well, technically I've nothing negative to call these games out on. I always have and always will see packages like this for what they exactly are. Cash cows. You could buy this, but the difference between this and emulation on PC for free is at most negligible. Argue with me all you will about how I missed the point, and if arcade ports are what you seek, then this meets the mark, flaws and all. It is, however, only 6 games. It's not the worst list of games I've ever seen by any stretch of the imagination, but they could have been done better. For me, Tempest will be the only reason I come back to this, if at all. And even then, I've got Tempest 2000 on the Saturn, which is an upgrade of this game, so I'm not even sure of the relevance.